Keith Whitley was found dead in his Goodlettsville home just after noon today. At this point, his death is a mystery to police. Barb Kramer reports.
I'm no stranger to the rain.
For decades, the story of Keith Whitley's tragic death seemed simple, if heartbreaking. On May 9, 1989, the world of country music lost one of its brightest rising stars to what was officially called acute alcohol poisoning. The story was straightforward. A brilliant artist, haunted by a lifelong battle with alcoholism, finally lost his fight. The case was closed, and fans were left to mourn a legend gone too soon. What if the man who signed the death certificate, the man who held the final word on the truth, was a fraud? Shocking details that have emerged about the disgraced official who performed Keith Whitley's autopsy paint a much more sinister picture. The medical examiner, Dr. Charles Harlan, wasn't just a flawed professional. His career was a train wreck of lies, misconduct, and corruption so deep it sent innocent people to prison. His documented history of falsifying reports and gross negligence forces us to ask a terrifying question. If he lied about other deaths, could he have lied about Keith Whitley's? The mystery of what really happened that day isn't just about the demons Whitley fought. It's about the very real and very corrupt people who were supposed to tell the truth. And it turns out, the truth is not good at all. Before the tragedy and controversy, there was the voice. A voice that seemed to rise right out of the soil of the Kentucky hills, steeped in bluegrass and overflowing with a heartache that was as real as it was resonant. Jackie Keith Whitley, born in Ashland, Kentucky, wasn't just a singer. He was a prodigy. At 6 years old, he was playing guitar, and by 8, he was already performing on the radio. Anyone who heard him, even as a kid, knew he was a once-in-a-generation talent. His teenage years were a collision of musical destiny and burgeoning alcoholism. In a twist of fate fit for a country song, he and his friend, another future legend named Ricky Skaggs, were discovered together. When their car broke down, they were killing time playing songs when none other than Ralph Stanley overheard them. The bluegrass patriarch was so blown away, he hired them on the spot. At just 15, Keith Whitley became the lead singer for Stanley's legendary Clinch Mountain Boys. This wasn't just a gig. It was a masterclass in the raw, high lonesome sound that would become the bedrock of his music. He later moved on to another pioneering group, J.D. Crowe and the New South, where his reputation as a vocalist of incredible emotional depth just kept growing. In the bluegrass world, Keith Whitley was already a star, but Whitley had his eyes on Nashville. He made the move in 1983, trying to break into mainstream country music. His first album didn't make a huge splash, but his second effort with RCA Records changed everything. In 1985, he released L.A. to Miami, and the single Miami, My Amy slowly but surely climbed into the top 20. It was the breakthrough he needed, showcasing a voice that could be both vulnerable and strong in the same breath. Then came his 1988 masterpiece, Don't Close Your Eyes. This album was a phenomenon. The title track, When You Say Nothing at All, and I'm No Stranger to the Rain, all shot to #1. These weren't just hits. They were instant classics that defined the neo-traditional sound of the era. He Died found the perfect blend of commercial appeal and artistic soul. He had it all. A marriage to fellow country singer Lori Morgan, a family, and a career that was exploding. Just 2 weeks after his death, a surprise invitation to join the Grand Ole Opry was waiting for him, the highest honor in country music. He was on the verge of superstardom. But beneath the stage lights, a darkness that had followed him his entire life was getting ready to swallow him whole. For every soaring note Keith Whitley sang, there was a deep, corresponding personal pain. His battle with alcoholism wasn't a footnote. It was a central, defining, and ultimately fatal part of his life. This wasn't a habit he picked up in Nashville. It was a demon he met as a teenager in the backwoods of Kentucky, and it never let him go. Whitley himself admitted he Started drinking heavily around 15 or 16. To him, it was part of being a country singer. He once said, "I learned to do things the way the old-timers did it. I thought everybody had to drink to be in the business. Lefty drank, Hank drank, George Jones was still drinking, and I had to. That's just the way it was." This relationship with alcohol quickly became a dance with death. The stories from his youth are terrifying. He and his friends would get drunk on bootleg bourbon and race cars down winding mountain roads. In one horrific crash, he was a passenger in a car that tried to take a curve at 120 miles per hour, killing his friend and nearly breaking Whitley's neck. A couple of years later, he drove his own car off a 120-foot cliff into a frozen river. He walked away with just a broken collarbone, cheating death again. This wasn't just recklessness. It was a pattern of self-destruction. When he got to Nashville, the pressure only fueled the fire. His wife, Lori Morgan, found herself living with what she called a ticking time bomb. In her 1997 autobiography, she described the harrowing lengths she went to keep him safe. His addiction was so bad she couldn't trust him around mouthwash or even hairspray. She wrote about having to tie his leg to hers at night to keep him from sneaking out to find a drink. It was, in her words, a living hell. Morgan put her own career on hold to manage his sobriety. "I feel in my own heart I kept Keith alive a lot longer because I was there all the time," she said. "Every time the phone would ring, it was in the back of my mind that there was somebody calling to tell me he's been in a wreck or died of alcohol." There were sober periods. He got clean for a time in 1987, admitting, "It was a matter of life and death. If I hadn't stopped drinking, I don't think I'd be alive today." But the sobriety was fragile, lasting only about 6 months before he relapsed. The disease had too strong a hold. His final #1 hit, released in his lifetime, "I'm No Stranger to the Rain," was a poignant anthem of resilience. But while the man on the radio sang about walking through the storm, the man at home was being consumed by it. He was living the heartbreaking lyrics of his own songs, a tragic hero in a story he couldn't rewrite. The first weekend of May 1989 started with a bittersweet goodbye. Keith drove Lori to the airport for a promotional tour in Alaska. He gave her a greeting card, and looking back, the words were chillingly prophetic. "If I could have any wish I wanted, may worries, troubles, and problems never linger. May they only make you that much stronger." It felt less like a loving note and more like a final farewell. With Lori gone, the ticking time bomb she had so carefully managed was left on its own. Keith began what was described as a weekend-long drinking binge. On the morning of Tuesday, May 9th, 1989, things seemed deceptively calm. Whitley spoke to his mother on the phone, and nothing seemed seriously wrong. His brother-in-law, Lane Palmer, stopped by the house in Goodlettsville, Tennessee, around 8:30 a.m. They had coffee and planned to play golf and have lunch later. Keith was then going to work on new songs for a duets album with Lori. Everything seemed normal. Palmer left, telling Keith he'd be back in an hour. What happened in the next few hours is the central mystery. This is where the official story begins and where the disturbing questions take root. According to some reports, Whitley's manager, Jack McFadden, also stopped by. He supposedly couldn't get Keith to answer the locked bedroom door and, hearing rustling sounds inside, eventually left. If true, it was a critical missed opportunity. When Lane Palmer returned around 11:30 a.m., he found a scene of silent horror. Keith Whitley was in his bedroom, fully clothed, lying face down and unresponsive on his bed. Palmer called for an ambulance, but it was too late. Whitley was taken to a local hospital where he was pronounced dead. There's still confusion about his exact age. His birth certificate says he was born in 1954, making him 34, but his gravestone says 1955, which would have made him 33. The news ripped through Nashville. Music Row was lined with black ribbons in his memory. The community was stunned. The initial reports were a blur, but soon the official explanation would come, an explanation delivered by a man who would cast a long, dark shadow over the entire tragedy. The day after Keith Whitley's death, Davidson County Medical Examiner Dr. Charles Harlan delivered his official ruling: accidental acute ethanolism, alcohol poisoning. On the surface, it was a tragic but believable open and shut case. The key piece of evidence was Whitley's blood alcohol content, BAC. Harlan reported it was a staggering 47, nearly 5 times the legal limit. Dr. Harlan said this was like drinking 20 one-ounce shots of 100-proof whiskey. The autopsy also found non-lethal traces of cocaine and a Valium-like drug in his system, but Harlan was clear: the alcohol alone was enough to kill him. The scene seemed to support this. Police reportedly found empty beer cans and, more disturbingly, an empty bottle of mouthwash and hairspray bottles, suggesting a man desperate for a fix. For a public aware of his struggles, this horrific explanation made a grim kind of sense. The story was set. Keith had accidentally drunk himself to death. The case was closed. For years, this was the accepted truth. But this entire narrative rests on the work of one man, Dr. Charles Harlan. And that's where this house of cards begins to fall apart. Dr. Charles Harlan was not a reliable man of science. He was a deeply compromised figure whose professional life was a disaster of scandals and fraud. The official story of Keith's death is only as credible as the man who wrote it. And as the truth about Dr. Harlan came out, it became clear his credibility was zero. The foundation of the official story wasn't stone, it was sand, and the tide of Harlan's own corruption was about to wash it all away. The man who held Keith Whitley's final truth in his hands was a charlatan in a lab coat. Dr. Charles Harlan's professional legacy is a grotesque mess of incompetence, dishonesty, and ghoulish behavior that ultimately destroyed his career. To understand the real questions around Whitley's death, you have to understand the man who defined its cause. Harlan's fall from grace was an avalanche of scandals. In 1994, he resigned as Nashville's medical examiner after multiple women sued him for sexual harassment. The state later terminated his contract as chief medical examiner. The allegations against him were horrifying. He was known for making cruel remarks to families of the deceased. Reports surfaced that he kept body parts in jars in his office and home. In one of the most disturbing claims, it was reported he sometimes allowed his dog in the autopsy room, and the dog may have even eaten part of a victim. But it was his professional misconduct that truly wrecked lives. Harlan's work was directly responsible for multiple wrongful convictions. His name is tied to the exonerations of people like Wayne Burgess, who spent 24 years in prison based on Harlan's flawed testimony, and Joyce Watkins and Charlie Dunn, who were wrongly imprisoned for 27 years. He misidentified a murder as an accidental fall and ruled that children murdered by a parent had died of SIDS. He also lied about his credentials and presented bogus science in court. In May 2005, it all came crashing down. The state of Tennessee permanently revoked Dr. Charles Harlan's medical license, finding him guilty on 20 counts of misconduct, including making false statements, gross negligence, and incompetence. This is the man who performed Keith Whitley's autopsy. This is the man who declared the 47 blood alcohol level. This is the man who wrote the final chapter of Keith Whitley's life. Every single piece of his official finding has to be seen through the lens of his proven history of lies and incompetence. The question is no longer if Dr. Harlan was corrupt. The question is how that corruption impacted Keith Whitley's case. With Dr. Harlan's credibility destroyed, the official narrative of Keith Whitley's death collapses. We're not looking at facts anymore. We're looking at claims made by a proven liar. Let's start with that 47 back. While a level that high is possible for someone with severe, long-term alcoholism, it's still an astonishing number. Could it have been the result of a botched test from a negligent examiner? We have no independent verification. We only have the word of a man later found guilty of signing false certificates. Was the number exaggerated? Was the sample contaminated? We'll never know for sure, because the only person who certified it is completely untrustworthy. Then there are the unconfirmed rumors that have swirled for decades, complicating the official timeline. In her autobiography, Lori Morgan herself brought up a disturbing detail. She alleged that her brother-in-law, Lane Palmer, found a bag of cocaine on the dresser and swallowed it before authorities arrived. If true, that's a deliberate contamination of a death scene. What else might have been altered or hidden before the police and a corrupt medical examiner showed up? This opens the door to theories the official report was meant to shut down. Could foul play have been involved? The idea doesn't seem so crazy when you remember that the man ruling it out was Dr. Charles Harlan, a man who had previously mistaken murder for SIDS. While speculative, theories about what happened now have a chilling new context. Was he killed by shadowy figures? Was his death arranged by someone who saw him as a threat? Could the alcohol have been forcibly administered to look like an accident? When the forensic expert himself is a fraud, these questions are no longer just fan denial. It's important to note that Whitley's family, including Lori Morgan, has never publicly disputed that alcohol poisoning was the cause of death. Their acceptance may have come from a need for closure long before Harlan's full disgrace was public knowledge. The mystery isn't if alcohol killed him. The mystery is whether he did it alone. Because of Charles Harlan, the truth wasn't preserved. It was buried under a mountain of doubt. The official story is broken, and the questions remain. What do you believe really happened to Keith Whitley? Was it a tragic accident, as the now discredited report claims, or was there something more sinister at play? Let us know your theories in the comments below. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries that some have tried to bury. The story of Keith Whitley is a tragedy in 2 acts. The first is the heartbreaking loss of a generational talent, a voice silenced too soon by a disease he fought his whole life. The second, and maybe more insidious tragedy, is the corruption of the truth that followed. The mystery of his death isn't solved by finding a new culprit, but by the definitive proof that the official narrative is completely unreliable. We now know that the chief witness, the final authority on the facts, Dr. Charles Harlan, was a professional liar. His permanent disgrace means the autopsy of Keith Whitley cannot be taken as fact. It's just the opinion of a discredited official. We may never know for sure what happened in that house in the final hours of Keith Whitley's life. The contamination of the investigation by Dr. Harlan guarantees that doubt will linger forever. Was it a simple overdose, a suicide, or a perfectly disguised murder signed off on by a medical examiner who either didn't see the truth or didn't? Care to find it? We're left with a legacy haunted by a permanent question mark. We have the timeless music, songs of heartbreak and resilience that still move us decades later. And we have the chilling knowledge that the man tasked with writing the last word on his life was a fraud. The official story of Keith Whitley's death isn't just a tragedy. It's a story built on a foundation of corruption. And that, in the end, is the most sinister truth of all.